So I've been interested in looking this guy up and his music ever since I, pretty much came across him because him and Poppy were dating and now they're engaged at this point, and I just kind of kept hearing his name over and over and over, and I hadn't heard anything he ever did, so I was like, I might as well give this a try here on my first listen. And today we're going to be talking about Mr. Eric Whitney. You don't know who that is? Well, you might know when I tell you his stage name, Ghostemane. He's a rapper, metal artist. He does a lot of different shit. He's like one of those musicians. It's hard to explain the sound because with every song it definitely changes and varies, so this is going to be an interesting episode and whatnot, so I guess we'll just get it started. I do want to talk about the things that I dislike first, mainly because, you save the best for last usually, and when his rapping comes into play, I'm not a big fan of his flow. It's not that there's really anything off, but he just kind of has like this follow the beat type flow, and it's not necessarily your regular follow the beat type beat, but it is very just, he raps like Ronnie Radke to me, like when Falling in Reverse does their whole rapping shit. That's what he sounds like. He's got like the exact same kind of like whininess in his voice. So, I mean, there's that. He also does a little bit of like the, not necessarily mumbling, but close to it in this way as well. And I don't know, I guess I'm just not that huge of a fan on it. Some songs that show those examples are Ball Gag and Gatika. Is that how you would say it? I'm not too sure. He doesn't seem like he's a musician that you would go to rely on for hooks either. He kind of has that like mainstream syndrome or like Lil Pump syndrome where it's just kind of the same thing said over and over and over again for about 20-25 seconds or so, and it takes up the majority of his song most of the time because his songs aren't even that long, so most of the time it's just him saying the chorus and then just, a couple of short verses here and there. And most of this comes from, I heard his recent album, Noise. I did go back and listen to some other things, but I think the one that we're going to focus on here is Noise. So that's where most of this is coming from for me. And then there were some times where I would just hear the beat just overlapping his vocals too much. Like, turn the beat down sometimes, dude. Like, it was mixed fine, but there was just times where he'd be like singing, rapping, or talking, and I wouldn't be able to understand anything he's saying because that beat is just going off, and you're like, it's a nice beat, but Jesus Christ, when you're singing, maybe tone it down a bit so that way it's not overlapping your vocals, so that way I can understand what you're saying in this case. But for the things I dislike, that's mainly about it. It's nothing too big. I mean, I wasn't necessarily like disgusted with what I heard or just downright borderline like, no, this isn't for me. There were some moments where I was like that, but for the most part, I wasn't necessarily cringing. Now these are the things that I like, and, I say this in the nicest way. I like the fact that his songs are short and sweet because his styles that he does may not be for everybody, and that's a fact in itself. So the fact that they're like short and sweet, it's like it gets people to be able to get used to it, I think, just in the nick of time, and a lot of his songs don't feel like they need to be super long in this case anyway, or else it would just get way too repetitive for someone's liking. So I can praise him for that, as his Noise album that I listened to was very short. It was 12 songs, but a lot of the songs, other than like 2, fell under the 3-minute mark, so it was just a nice, easy listen to try to, figure out where I was with this. I do like the fact that he is horror-based. He does a lot of horrorcore stuff. He's kind of like, well, there's a couple here, and I'll get to the influences in a minute, but for the most part, he mainly sounds like Marilyn Manson trying to rap in this case, which could be a good or a bad thing. I don't necessarily know how Marilyn raps, but he has that creepy aesthetic. He also sees influences like 9 Inch Nails, Aphex Twin, and even a tinge of the Suicide Boys I heard in there as well. There could be more, but that was just what I was picking up influence-wise when listening, because there are times that he does sound like very Nine Inch Nails-y with like a Trent Reznor type vocals on songs like Inside and Black Blood, and like I mentioned, the song Flesh kind of sounds like Marilyn Manson if he was rapping, and then of course the whole rapping with the metal mixed in with it, it's just very Suicide Boys-y, and Jesus Christ, that threw me off guard. Thunder, feel the thunder. Anyway, the like beats that are in there, like the like really weird beats, do kind of sound like an Aphex Twin song. Kind of sound like Aphex Twin was like, hey, I made these beats, here you go. So I think that's pretty cool. He definitely has these influences, and instead of, you know, sticking with one, he's able to give us a lot of it. I mean, Jesus Christ, he recently just did like a black metal EP. It wasn't anything big. It came out in April in 2019. It was called Fear Network, and these songs are short. You got like a 53-second song, a minute and 54-second song, and a minute and 18. But good Lord, it is definitely different from his rapping stuff, which not to say he hadn't done anything like that before, but it was definitely weird listening to that over the album and all the other songs on other albums that I was listening to. It was like, you know, I'm a sucker for someone who likes going out of their comfort zone, or not necessarily going out of their comfort zone, but trying something different, even though they have this certain crowd that's here for this certain thing or this certain thing. It really goes to show that they are willing to take risks, and sometimes even willing to lose fans, because some fans might hear this new sound or this experimentation and go, I don't know if I'm a big fan of this, so maybe try again or whatever. You know, he does that. He can sing and scream, I'll give him that. I think I prefer his singing and screaming a lot better over his rapping. It's just less annoying to me in this way, and it fits more of what he tries to go for with this horror-based stuff, because he has that voice for it, and it does definitely pop sometimes. I had mentioned his experimentation on his songs is, you know, mostly good. Most of the time I do like the song Singularity. That is where he really pops and all this stuff. And the only song I listened to that had like a feature on it was Nigeria, and that one ironically just happened to feature Lil Peep on it, which didn't surprise me, because I was like, well, I mean, you know, Ghostemane I guess can be put in with like the emo rap crowd, and Lil Peep was that, and Lil Peep did have like the whole screaming thing in his music sometimes along with the rap, not necessarily the metal, but he would scream and all this other stuff. So I can kind of see that. Like, it just made sense to me when I clicked on it, because I was just scrolling through. I'm like, oh, Lil Peep's on this song. I'm not a Lil Peep fan, but I mean, this just seems like it would go well. And, you know, it was fine for what it was. I think it was another one that had like a weak hook, but it wasn't like horrible in this case with it. So, yeah. My final take on Ghostemane is that he's not bad, but he's not horrible, and he's not necessarily great. He's not the worst thing I've ever heard, and he definitely, you know, is better than most of these, you know, emo SoundCloud rapper type people, where, you know, he does definitely do a lot of this different stuff, and he can do some stuff well, but I just feel like that I don't want him to pick one thing and stick with it, but if the rapping thing just isn't what I would make it out to be. You know, this guy started out singing in local punk bands and doom metal bands, and I just don't think he's necessarily cut out for the rapping portion, but I wouldn't be upset if he just decided to stick with the more pop rock type metal thing that he does on his other songs. I feel like that's where he's at his most best, and yeah, I mean, that's basically it. I think if I had to rate Ghostemane, I'd give him a 3 out of 5. I think I can go back to some of his stuff, and will definitely check out anything if something comes out. Like I said, the most recent thing I found was the album he released last year, and nothing really since, so I don't know when he plans on having new stuff out, but he just seems like a pretty interesting fella from the beginning, so I had to check him out music-wise, because I'm like, well, Jesus, I mean, he's marrying Poppy, who has this weird character, is into some, what people would call weird music, and she kind of goes all over the place with what she's doing. Maybe he'll be kind of the same and be interesting, and he was. I mean, I don't necessarily think he's playing a character. Maybe. I mean, with the whole horrorcore thing, there's this whole, like, he has to play this character or whatever, but he definitely does what she does in some sense. They both mix these genres together, and for the most part, they do a good job with it, and they're not afraid to step out of their comfort zone and do something else and not necessarily stick with the same thing all the time. It's what can we do to better ourselves with each release. And that's another thing I guess I can appreciate about him, is it seems like with every release that I've heard, he seems to be improving on. So yeah, good on him. That's basically it for me about what I think about him. You can tell me in the comments below if you've heard anything from him. What are your thoughts? Are you a fan? Are you not a fan? Would just love to hear your overall input, and maybe put in the comments below, how would I describe Ghostemane to somebody, because it's, like I said, it's hard with an artist like this who does so many different things, so many different genres, and has this kind of weird, unique style and look. It's hard to look at somebody and go, well, and explain to somebody that this is what they are, so you should listen. No, it's a lot more complicated than that, and I want to see if you guys are able to basically explain Ghostemane in a pretty good way to, get people's attention. Not just a certain group of people, but like a lot of people. Like, oh yeah, he's a rapper, but he also does a little bit of black metal, and he's got like this horrorcore aesthetic. I mean, I guess that would be my best way of saying it, but at the same point in time, I wouldn't necessarily know who to go to and be like, hey, are you into this stuff? Because some people are just into rap and don't want to hear the whole horror shit and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, how do you explain him to a massive crowd of people? That's the challenge that I'm going to give you in the comments. But yeah, that's basically it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're staying safe out there. And until then, I will catch you all in the next one.